Disclaimer: these stories were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. My town had a food drive every year called Help Feed Bobby. My hometown was an odd place. We had a video store that never had the movies I wanted, a convenience store whose slushy machine was always broken, and a yearly food drive with a weird name. Help Feed Bobby. If you're thinking, who's Bobby? Then you had something in common with my 10-year-old self, every other kid in town, and the people just passing through during the time the food drive was active. We did ask our parents, teachers, and basically any adult why it was called that, but the standard answer was that Bobby was just meant to represent children whose parents couldn't afford food regularly. The other one was that Bobby is meant to be an acronym, but when pressed on what BOBBY is supposed to spell out, they always found a way to stop or change the conversation. For the longest time, the most information we received was that at the end of the drive, some people would volunteer to take all the donated food to its intended destination, and then, around the same time the following year, it would start all over again. One day, my dad came home and told my mom and me that he was going to have to go out next Saturday, as he had volunteered to help deliver the donated food to its recipients. I tried to ask him where the food was going and if I could come with him, but he shot both questions down with sorry, sport, grown-ups only. I wanted to know so badly that I came up with a plan. On the day he was supposed to deliver the food, my dad came home with a truck full of donation boxes. As sneakily as I could, I snuck into the back of the truck, emptied the contents of one of the boxes, and ducked down inside. I realized that the chances of being caught were high, but I didn't care. I wanted to see where all this food went every year. After about an hour, I heard the truck start and felt it move. I wanted to poke my head out and see, but I knew my dad could just check the rearview mirror and spot me. Another possible 3 hours, and I felt the truck come to a stop. I heard my dad get out of his truck and some other volunteers getting out of their cars. I couldn't really hear the conversation at the time. I did feel someone grabbing the box I was in. Damn, what's in this? Watermelons and ham. He continued to grumble as he carried the box somewhere I couldn't see. It was maybe 45 minutes before he finally placed the box down. I got excited. I would finally see where the food went. I waited until I didn't hear any more footsteps before I exited the box and started to look around. It was a large cavern. I saw what I presumed was the entrance. The place was lit by what I assumed were battery-operated lights, with boxes of donated food stacked everywhere. Looking out on the other side, I saw a cliff edge. Walking to it, I looked over the edge. I don't know how deep it went, I just knew it was the size of a football stadium. I kept thinking to myself, what was the point of this food drive? Why bring all the food to some cave? And for the 1,000th time, who is Bobby? I felt the rumbling before I heard it. Then I saw the cavern begin to shake violently. Looking down, I saw something begin to emerge from the darkness. It looked like the beginning of a bright orange beak. From there, a head only slightly smaller than the hole itself took form. Imagine if a turtle's head were covered in spikes, and you'd have the beginning of what its head looked like. It stopped at about 15 feet from the top of the cliff edge and began to open its large beak. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what this thing was going to do. For all I knew, it was about to breathe fire or grab me with some kind of frog tongue. But it just stayed there, like it was waiting for something. That's when I realized. This was Bobby. This thing came up here, it knows someone will feed it, because it's been fed every year for God knows how long. And this was only the head and neck of it. I couldn't fathom how big the rest of Bobby could be. My fascination/horror was cut short by the sounds of my dad and the other volunteers coming back down the cave path. I ran back over to the box I was hiding in, but realized they would probably start with that one. So I went to a stack of them near the entrance and crouched down next to it. My plan was once they all walked past, I was going to run back up and hide in my dad's truck. The voices and footsteps became audible as my dad and the other volunteers returned. Okay, that should be the last of it. Then we get a break for another year. I wish we could just cover everything in cyanide. Nice wish. There's not enough poison on the planet for that. Then I heard my dad. He sounded nervous. Even if it worked. How do we know that the body wouldn't stink up the whole town? Wait, I see its head. Then I heard my dad's first time seeing Bobby. Jesus Christ. I could hear the terror in my dad's voice. I almost wanted to run out of hiding and go hug him, let him know I saw it too, and he wasn't alone in his fear, but I knew that could make things bad for both of us. Another volunteer disregarded my dad's terror and nonchalantly remarked, "Let's get started. Just grab a box and throw it at the thing's mouth." I watched as they all started grabbing boxes and taking them to the edge. When it looked like all of their backs were turned, I quietly snuck to the entrance and ran back up to the mouth of the cave. From there, I saw my dad's truck and made my way to the back. A few weeks later, I was at the library trying to see if there was any more information about Bobby. I should have expected my town wouldn't keep records about a giant turtle monster living underneath it, but what was there was still helpful. The monster was most likely named after the town founder Bobby Robertson, and during times of famine, the town was prone to tremors and was nearly destroyed during the Great Depression by a sudden magnitude 3 earthquake. My guess is that the townsfolk of the time decided they needed the food more than Bobby, and he voiced his disapproval. I don't think my dad ever figured out that I was there with him that night, but I made it a point to spend more time with him, though I had to pretend that I wasn't also scared of turtles now. The next year, he did not volunteer to assist with Help Feed Billy. In fact, he had gotten a promotion at work, and we had to move away because of it. So for the past 22 years, I was able to let Help Feed Bobby slowly fade into my memories. Until a few days ago, when I was struck by nostalgia for my old hometown, so I started looking into what had happened since we moved. My hometown doesn't exist anymore. At some point in 2005, the town collapsed and sunk into the ground. The official explanation was that there were multiple caves under the town, and a long overdue mass cave-in had finally happened. It was harder to find any more information on what the town was like before the cave-in, but the most relevant piece I found came from a Facebook group for it. I learned that new people had replaced the previous town council in 2004, and in the same year, they voted to end the Help Feed Bobby food drive. Story 2. What to do if you find a human tooth in your Halloween candy. The first step to overcoming something is admittance. That's why I don't mind saying it. I have no friends. Or, at least, I didn't when I was 11 years old. Any description of my childhood sounds like a conversation with a therapist, so I'll save you the details. For context, I was raised by a single mother who longed to be child-free. I didn't know my father until I was 20 and went looking for him, and what I found made me regret the search. Since the age of 4, I was bullied severely. I was a magnate for it, and had a black eye more often than not. I can't even pretend that there was one kid who'd look out for me, one kind soul in my corner. There really wasn't. For a decade, I'd spend every recess sitting on my own. I felt invisible, like a ghost. Not even teachers seemed to care and would always ignore my raised hand in class. Sometimes, I could go days without speaking a word to anyone. I had one solace during this period of my life, and that was horror. The entire genre was a safety blanket I could wrap myself in. In my free time, I would read any horror book I could find. I felt like an addict at times, always looking for a fix, always trying to up the dose. I would often sneak downstairs at night and watch reruns of old horror flicks on cable TV. Sometimes, when my mother was wine drunk enough, she'd let me curl up on the sofa next to her, and we'd watch one together. Although infrequent, they were the happiest memories of my childhood. Naturally, Halloween was the only day I had ringed in my calendar. It was when I felt most at home, most understood. I wished for that feeling every day, but was glad nonetheless that it came for even 24 hours a year. October of 2008 was the first year I get to truly live out my Halloween fantasy. My mother made the executive decision that I was now allowed to trick or treat without her supervision, as long as I didn't go too far and came back by curfew. I agreed excitedly and spent every day from August onwards counting down the hours to the big night. When my Garfield-themed calendar finally landed on the 31st, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. My costume was perfected. I was going to spend the day as Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I made the mask myself from paper mache, and that coupled with a yellow apron and plastic chainsaw really brought the whole thing together. Now, I was extremely scrawny even for the standards of my age, but I like to think I pulled it off. I ate breakfast in it. I carved pumpkins in it, and even went out to the store to pick candy in it. While perusing the quickly emptying shelves of sweets, I walked past one of the bullies at my school. He didn't notice me. I felt invisible again, but this time in the way I wanted. I picked out a nice, classic selection of candy, and when I got home, filled a few bowls to the brim. I instructed my mother on the importance of trick or treat maintenance, explaining that if she leaves them unguarded for too long, they'll be ransacked. She assured me she would, and waved me off without looking away from the TV. The streets were magic. Hordes of costumed kids paraded around, all carrying sacks of slowly filling goodies. There were some good ones, I admit, but I was confident I had the best costume of all, even if it was slightly ruined by the inhaler necklace. I wandered the streets on my own, drifting from door to door and lining my pumpkin-themed bucket with candy. I felt free. A little later on in the night, I started to tail this group of kids my age, but from a different school. I followed a few steps behind them for a while, until an older boy dressed as Beetlejuice turned around and told me to fuck off. Disheartened and feeling an asthma attack coming on, I sat down by one of the park benches near the green and took my mask off. I wiped the sweat away and took a bang on my inhaler. Just before I got ready to carry on my merry way, I heard a familiar voice yell my least favorite nickname. "Hey, look, it's Dick Nose." My ears curled over as I looked everywhere, noticing a few kids in my class loitering around the nearest gazebo. Vern, a rotund 13-year-old in a skin-tight Spider-Man outfit, yelled and pointed at me. A minute later, I was running for my life with a gaggle of murderous tweens chasing after me. My pumpkin bucket of treats fell from my hand, spilling its contents onto the forest's ferny floor. I knew I couldn't risk going back for it, and kept running. I glanced around as I did and saw that half of the mob had split off to salvage my lost goods. The two who kept chasing me put up a good show, but I eventually lost them in the trees. After a while of walking in circles, I realized I'd lost myself too. Panic soon set in. My longing to live out a horror movie meant that I was acutely aware of the urban legends of my hometown. I knew that the woods I'd stumbled into were haunted. The year was 1978, according to most legends. A boy had been made to keep an eye on his kid brother while he went trick-or-treating, but instead dragged him along to the high school Halloween party. It was out in the forest, far from anyone who'd judged their underage drinking. A great bonfire was lit, and the teens danced around it all night long. Near midnight, the young boy became anxious, demanding he be taken home. His older brother, now drunk for the first time in his life, just shoved him aside. The young boy stumbled into the flames, his linen clown costume catching fire in the blink of an eye. All the teens could do was watch as he burned to death in front of them. He's been seen every Halloween since, wandering around the forest with charred skin, colorful fabric melted into flesh, and emitting an orange glow. For some reason, my mind decided to tell itself this story as I walked. I was so bitterly on edge that every bird's cry or snapping twig almost sent me in a cardiac arrest. The limp green glow stick I held out barely lit the way as darkness enveloped me on either side. As I walked, I began to notice a faint glow deep within the mess of trees. My hands shook as my body carried me towards it. A voice in the back of my head screamed at me not to, that it meant certain death at the hands of a demon child. Still I moved, passing deformed trees that twisted into disturbingly humanoid silhouettes. I was now almost upon the source of the glow. Stumbling through some foliage, I came out into a clearing of grass, which was soon replaced by gravel. Right there, in the center of it all, was a house. I thank God for making the forest spit me out directly into safety. A warm glow came from the downstairs windows, and the stacks of lit jack-o'-lanterns made the whole thing even more welcoming. I made my way with confidence up the front steps to the front door. I knocked twice and waited. After some time, it was answered, cautiously at first before swinging open. A man stood in the entrance. I remember that he looked to be in his 30s and had very soft features. His hair had the color of wet sand and was thinning. He wore a green cardigan vest, slacks, and a wide smile. He reminded me of my grandfather, despite his youth. "Hi," he said gleefully. "I'm Edward. What's your name?" "Hello, I'm Eric," I said, grinning back at him. "Well, Eric, I must say, I love your costume. Edward exclaimed. Thanks, I said, before realizing I was still holding the mask down by my side. I quickly put it on and looked back up at Edward. Eek, he said, somewhat condescendingly. Then, after a moment of silence, he spoke again. Would you like some candy? You're the first trick-or-treater at my door all night. I may as well give you the entire bucket. Really? I said, excited. Then I realized my limitations. I don't have anything to carry it with. No worries, Edward replied smoothly. Come inside and we'll sort something out. Having a mother who relied on strangers to raise her kid dispelled any notion of stranger danger I might have picked up in my youth. For me, it was the people I knew who I had to be afraid of. As such, I happily followed Edward inside and into his living room. He directed me to sit down on the beige leather sofa, in front of a table piled high with candy. The colorful, old-fashioned wrappers seemed to call my name. I sat still, waiting for permission to dig in. Hold on, buckaroo, Edward said, putting a hand on my shoulder briefly before sinking down into the adjacent armchair. Can I really have all of this? I asked him in a pleading tone. You sure can, he replied, every last bit. Suddenly, he leapt to his feet again. You know who just loved to meet you? He asked me. I paused, expecting the question to be rhetorical. When he just stood there, frozen in the same position with a white grin and intense eyes, I realized I actually had to answer before he moved on. No, I replied. My mother. He informed me. She loves company, especially from young, polite boys. Wait there while I go get her. Before I could respond, he disappeared out of the living room. I tried to listen for his footsteps, but they just seemed to stop as soon as he was out of view. I leaned back in my seat and looked around. The room, as did the rest of the house from what little I saw, had a very earthy theme. Lots of dark greens and browns. I noticed the thick cluster of taxidermied animals that spread around the room, which began to deeply unnerve. I could feel the glassy eyes of a dozen dead mammals fix on me. I began to sweat. The room was pretty dimly lit, and so I leaned over to the lamp on the rustic wooden stand beside the sofa. I flicked it on, illuminating more of the room. The pile of candy glistened with a new intensity. I couldn't imagine why Edward would care if I took one now, so I leaned over and pinched a small, pink-wrapped piece from the mountainous pile. I held it in my palm, feeling how hard it was. I noticed the wrapper looked like it had already been peeled back. I remember thinking I heard a noise and looked up, surveying the room around me. I couldn't find the source. I shrugged and went back to ogling the candy. I gently tore back the wrapper in my hand, wondering what flavor it would be. It was a human tooth. A molar, to be exact. It was stained and yellowing, and I couldn't stop staring. It kept it in the palm of my hand, my shock and disgust mixing to create a powerful paralytic. Lucky, you got one with some gum, Edward said as he closed it on me. I yelled out like an injured dog and threw the tooth to the floor. I fell backward against the sofa when I saw his mother. I crawled quickly away from the nightmare duo, trying to put as much space between them and me as I could. My hand brushed against something rough and protruding as I reached the other side of the couch. Looking down at the beige leather, I noticed a nipple looking up at me. Where are you going? Edward cooed. He held his mother upright by his side as he approached me, his loafers brushing over the shag rug that looked a little too like a giant wig. His mother looked almost like a storefront mannequin in the right light. She was a doll, essentially. A poorly shaped human figure was stitched together from a similar beige leather, although it looked more worn down. Judging from a few busted seams, she appeared to be stuffed with the same material the rug was made from. Her face, its face, was black and featureless. Although it lacked a mouth, nose, and eye, it was still smeared heavily with makeup in their approximate location. I gagged when I noticed the two ears sewn into place either side of the head, one noticeably darker in tone than the other. I fell from the couch, landing hard on the rustic wooden floor. Edward kept walking calmly towards me, holding his mother like he was helping an elderly woman walk. I got to my feet, falling back against the nearest wall in fear. Oh, don't be afraid, Eric. We're friends, Edward said, now standing almost directly in front of me. Come with me, and I'll introduce you to the rest of my family. I let out a shrill scream that tore its way through my throat. A dose of adrenaline hit my brain, and I grabbed a taxidermied raccoon with bulging eyes from the low shelf by my side. I span around, slamming its heavy wooden base against the window behind me. Part of it shattered, and I took a leap of faith, jumping through the window and onto the shrubbery beneath. I limped to my feet, staggering away as fast as I could from the glow of the house. I made my way across the gravel of the driveway, trying to put as much distance between me and the house as possible. Just before I made it to the barely paved road that led into the forest, I looked back. The door was open, and Edward stood not 50 yards away from me. The light behind him turned his form into a detailed silhouette. His right arm was thrown over the shoulder of his mother. His left was clutching the doll's wrist and held it above his head. He was waving it back and forth as if to bid me farewell. This happened almost 17 years ago, so forgive me for my foggy memory of what followed. I kept running as best it could down the gravel tract, which eventually turned into a dirt path which became increasingly overgrown. After following the path for what felt like days, I eventually emerged from the tree line to a main road. I made it back into my town just after sunrise, still scared and shivering. A cop picked me up and let me stay at the station with a blanket and a warm drink while she tried to contact my mother. During those few hours, I explained everything in as much detail as I could. Finally, my mother did come to pick me up, but not before the cop had taken an official written statement of my account. Of course, that wasn't the last I heard. The local police found Edward and arrested him in relation to 3 missing persons cases dating back almost a decade. From what I could gather, he's now serving a lengthy sentence somewhere out of our small county. The detail that still keeps me up at night, however, isn't the knowledge that I was sitting in the front room of a sadistic killer when I was just 11 years old. What keeps me up at night is the fact that, despite their comprehensive search of the entire property, they never found the dolls. Story 3. I worked for a moving company and had a weird experience at a client's home. I work for a medium-sized moving company in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a cool job, hard but satisfying. I haven't had to pay for a gym membership in years. After 6 years, I can say I've seen just about everything. And yes, I've seen that twice, and those things more times than I can count. For most people, moving day is one of the most miserable experiences imaginable. Since it's my job, I'm used to it, and maybe a little crazy for doing one of life's most stressful tasks every day. After a while, all the moves start to blur together. Every living room has the biggest sofa and rug in the house. No one ever cleans under their bed before we take it apart. And as cute as your pet is, please keep it out of the way so I don't trip and break your furniture. Or myself. The jobs I remember the best are the ones where we get big tips. And, of course, the first job where you have no choice but to use the client's bathroom for, well, you know. But there was one job this past summer that I can't stop thinking about. I'm the only guy from that crew still working here. Marcus and Jeremy quit the next day. It was supposed to be a simple one-day load and unload in South Nashville. Whenever I see a South Nashville job, I try to get Marcus and Jeremy on my team. The 3 of us worked like a machine, and South Nashville means expensive houses, expensive furniture, and generous clients. I wanted my A-team. The house sat at the end of a long driveway, tucked off the road. You couldn't see it from Google Street View, so we couldn't scope it out. Usually I recognize at least one house on any street I go down, someone I've moved before. But this driveway, I swear I'd never noticed it. When we pulled up, the owner was already waiting on the porch. Elderly woman, maybe late 70s. Short, gray hair, floral dress that looked like something from the 60s. It was a big white house, old wooden porch with rocking chairs, and inside, all the furniture was very traditional. She was sweet but stern. That's fine with me. I like to do a quick walkthrough, then get to work. Jeremy is more of the client chatter. During our pre-move walkthrough, she mentioned that armoire was built by my late husband. He surprised me with it while I was out of town. I'm afraid it may be too big and heavy to move. As much as I love it, I understand if you're unable to get it if it's too heavy. Movers have a bit of an ego, and we're all a bit crazy. Telling us something is too heavy might as well be daring us to move it. The armoire was a beast, solid wood, all one piece. Probably 600 pounds, easy. It sat against the far wall in an office-type room. Now that I think about it, The ceiling in that room was taller than the rest of the house. Marcus and I were muscle that day. Jeremy handled the dollies and tools. I joked to Marcus, loud enough for the client to hear, and ease her nerves, we've moved worse. We knew if we got this, a big tip was coming our way. We strained to lean it forward so Jeremy could slide the dolly underneath, and it made a sound that no mover likes to hear, splintering wood and cracking paint. Well, there goes our tip. We got off the wall, and a smell hit us. Old musty mothball why. Behind it we saw a door. The house was old, but well-maintained. This door, though, looked ancient, like something out of a different century. Oversized, probably 100 pounds, with paint so cracked it was chipping off. No knob, just a hole where one used to be, probably so the armor could sit flush against the wall. The white paint was flaking off to reveal dark, almost black wood underneath. The wall surrounding it wasn't even finished, just rough, splintered planks. Without taking my eyes off the door, I asked, "Ma'am, did you know there was a door behind here?" We turned around to see her reaction, but she wasn't there. Jeremy went to look for her while Marcus and I examined the door. After a few minutes, Jeremy came back. "She's gone," he said. "Car's not in the driveway either." That wasn't totally weird. Sometimes clients leave to grab lunch or run errands, though they usually tell us first. We figured she'd be back soon. Marcus and I stared at each other. Curiosity got the better of us. He stuck a screwdriver in the hole, twisted, and the latch gave out. The door creaked open. The smell grew stronger. What I saw on the other side didn't make sense. It was the same room, the same office we were just in, except everything we had packed into boxes was back in its place. The same furniture, the same rugs. It was like we'd never even started the job. And everything was flipped, mirrored. Marcus went pale. "What the fuck?" I took a step forward into the room. Then the owner walked in from the mirrored kitchen. Or at least, I thought it was her. She looked the same, but slightly off. Her hair was darker. She walked with a limp, and her smile was too wide, stretched at the corners. "Hey," she said brightly, like we were old friends. "Are you ready for lunch?" Marcus stammered. We were just talking to you in the other room. We thought you left." She blinked. "Other room?" I said, "Yeah, that room behind the armoire. This house, but different." She smiled faintly. "Oh, that old thing? You can't move it. The man who built this house built it into the wall. I've always hated it." We looked at each other, uneasy. I turned around to go back through the doorway. But the armor was back, standing perfectly flush against the wall like it had never been moved. "Ma'am," I said, "what's going on?" She tilted her head. "Are you ready for lunch?" The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. The smell hung thick and sour like rot. Marcus whispered, "We need to get out of here." "Ma'am, we're just going to grab a few supplies from the truck," I said. We hustled down the hallway, toward the front door. But something was off. The hallway seemed longer. The angles of the walls weren't right, subtle curves, slants that made you dizzy. The floor felt uneven, like it was shifting under us. When we reached where the front door should have been, it wasn't there. The hallway just kept going. Jeremy said quietly, "Guys, the house is mirrored. The door we came in through, it's on the other side." We turned and ran the other way, weaving through the warped halls. The air grew colder. Finally, we burst into a room that mirrored the office, the armoire standing on the opposite wall. We didn't hesitate. We pulled it until it fell over. When it hit the floor, it broke apart like old rotten wood. The door was there again. We pushed through it and walked back into the same house. Dust hung in the air. The windows were cracked, streaked with grime. Wallpaper peeled from the walls. The air was cold, stale. The furniture, the glassware, the rugs, everything was coated in decades of dust. I called out, "Hello." No answer. Marcus turned to me, pale. "Get to the truck. Let's get the fuck out of here." I opened the front door. The yard was overgrown, the trees thicker, like years had passed. Our truck was still parked in the same spot, shiny and out of place. The house behind it looked like something from another century. We didn't say a word. We got in and drove away. When we hit the main road, our phones lit up with service again. We called our manager. He didn't believe us until Marcus and Jeremy both quit the next day. He told me to take a week off to rest. Unfortunately, in this industry, when you're inside multiple homes every single day, strange things happen. This wasn't my only weird experience, just the one that still doesn't make sense. Story 4. I have never been the same since walking under that broken streetlight. I've never been one to believe much in the supernatural, nor would anyone call me superstitious by nature. But since a certain incident in my 20s, I found myself wondering whether we really are alone in the dark. You see, I worked a graveyard shift back then. Hell, I still do. And I grew up in a small town in New England. I worked with a buddy of mine, and since we were the only ones in our friend group awake at those hours, he'd often invite me over late at night to hang out until the early morning. The thing was, even though I was in my 20s, I didn't have a car. He'd offer to pick me up sometimes, but out of modesty, I usually refused, unless the weather was bad enough to make the walk miserable. It wasn't a long trip anyway, maybe a bit over a mile, and straight the whole way. I lived on the outskirts of a small city, if you could even call it that. At its largest, it might have had 20,000 residents, give or take. My family had been there since the 1930s, starting with my grandmother. She never left, and my father raised his own kind of hell around that same small town through the 70s and early 80s. Now, 20,000 people might sound like a lot to some of you, but in a place like that, it isn't. In a town that size, everyone seems to know at least one other person in your family. The only reason I bring this up is because of what happened one random night on my way to my friend Doug's place. I made that walk dozens of times before and never had any problems. But ever since I was a kid, I'd always been afraid of the dark. It's embarrassing to admit, but even as an adult, that fear never really went away. The walk itself was mostly fine. Quiet streets, a straight shot down a sleepy neighborhood, a little past the halfway point to Doug's, among all the brightly lit streetlights, was this one house that had a dying streetlight out front. It didn't stay dead. It buzzed weakly, flared, then dimmed again, perpetually fighting to stay alive. I watched a lot of horror movies growing up, and at around 10 p.m., most of the houses were already dark. It always felt like I was the only soul out there. And that flickering streetlight, it scared the hell out of me. Like I said, I'm not superstitious, but there was something about that light, the way it sputtered in the quiet, that made that space feel wrong. It was the same kind of wrong you feel when the victim would enter the room. They would be murdered in those old horror movies. You know, the ones with the clueless teenagers, the killer in a mask, and the glint of a hatchet just before the screaming starts. But when that one light went out, when it flickered and died for those few seconds, it was different. The darkness that settled there wasn't natural. It wasn't just shadow. It was thick and absolute, as if the darkness gave license for malevolence to come alive. For that brief stretch of sidewalk, it felt like the world just stopped. Reality itself would seem to thin out until you reached the safety of the next light. I can't explain it better than that. Just that stepping through that patch of dark always felt like crossing through something, only briefly abating between the small moments of illumination. Since the road was straight, I could see that spot from a long way off, and maybe that was part of the problem. I'd start staring at it long before I ever got close, like my brain was trying to make it into something more than it was. Still, the closer I came, the worse it got. A creeping dread would crawl up my spine when I got within a couple 100 feet of that patch of dark, even though it only took seconds to cross it. Every time, I came out fine on the other side. Nothing ever happened. But in those few moments, swallowed by that intermittent, inky blackness, I always felt like something was there. Like I was in real, immediate danger, though from what, I couldn't say. You have to understand, this city wasn't exactly thriving. It was poor. The kind of place where the sidewalks cracked and stayed that way for years, where the power lines sagged, and the roads only got patched when they absolutely had to. So, a flickering streetlight on an otherwise functional street? That was nobody's priority. It stayed that way for years, maybe decades. God, I wish they had fixed it. Like I said, nothing had ever really happened there. Just that constant, gnawing sense of dread whenever I walked through. But eventually, like everything left to rot long enough, that much-neglected streetlight finally gave up for good. One night, it just flickered and went out. If I thought the dread was bad before, it was nothing compared to when that space fell into permanent blackness. The first night, I saw it dead. No flicker, no weak glow, just a void. I nearly stopped walking altogether. Every time after that, I'd slow down as I approached, heart picking up, mouth going dry. I tell myself the usual things. Stop being a baby. This is stupid. You're a grown man, for God's sake. But none of it helped. Standing there at the edge of that darkness, I didn't feel like a man anymore. I felt like a kid again, small, helpless, and terrified of what might be waiting where the light couldn't reach. Even then, I'd force myself to swallow the fear and just walk through it. It wasn't far, barely half a minute at a steady pace, and every time, nothing happened. This went on for weeks. Same dread, same routine, same relief once I reached the next pool of light. Until one night, I've been standing there at the edge longer than usual, caught in that same argument with myself. Just go, it's fine, stop being stupid, when I finally stepped forward. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost didn't notice it at first. A voice. Nice night, isn't it? The words were harmless enough, but hearing them disembodied in that thick blackness froze the blood in my veins. The voice wasn't close, exactly, but near enough. I squinted into the dark and could just make out the faint outline of the porch, the one belonging to the house with the dead streetlight. And there he was, a tall figure sitting back in what I could barely make out as a lawn chair, the faint orange glow of a cigarette the only light in the void. Here's the thing. Despite all the dread, despite that creeping terror that gripped me every time I reached that spot, in a town that small, you were always taught to be polite to your neighbors. So, when it finally registered that it wasn't some monster speaking to me from the dark, but just a man, I forced myself to answer. My voice came out far steadier than I felt. Yeah, I said. A bit cold, but otherwise nice and clear. He didn't respond right away. I could see the faint ember of his cigarette brighten as he took a long drag, the tip glowing briefly in the dark. After a slow exhale and what felt like an eternity of silence, he finally spoke again. You're Mark's kid, right? I froze. Mark was my father. Something about his casual tone implied familiarity to me. Knowing a bit of my mom and dad's history, the realization hit me. This man must have known him back in his younger days. It was the only explanation, seeing as my father barely left the house anymore. You see, my father was what doctors call a cardiac cripple. That's what they said after his last heart attack. An attack so severe it left him weak, struggling just to get around. His life permanently slowed to a crawl. I tried to play it off like I wasn't startled. Yep, I said, keeping my tone as even as I could. Mark's my dad. You know him. It was a stupid thing to say. He'd literally just mentioned my father by name, but I wasn't exactly thinking straight at that moment. My nerves were still heightened from hearing a voice out of the dark. The man took another slow drag from his cigarette. The ember glowed, then faded again. He sat there quietly for a few seconds before finally speaking. Yeah, he said, his voice low and drawn out, like someone too tired and oddly sad. Your dad and I used to party back in the day. Lived like there was no tomorrow. Though eventually he calmed down and had that family of his. I figured he meant my mom, my brothers, and me. It wasn't strange. My dad had been a wild one when he was younger. A lot of the older folks in town had stories. But something about the way this man said it, slow, almost nostalgic, made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite place. A shame how he died, the man said after another long pause. Your dad. I never expected a heart attack to take old Mark down. For a second, I just stood there, not sure if I'd heard him right. Then I frowned. Oh no, my father's not dead. Yeah, he had a heart attack, but he's doing fine. Well, as fine as someone can be after something like that. The man didn't say anything right away. The only sound was the faint crackle of his cigarette. Then the ember flared again, one long inhale that seemed to stretch too long, followed by another heavy exhale. He didn't respond, didn't move, just sat there in that impossible darkness, quiet. No, the man finally said. His voice was calm, too calm. He died. I remember reading his obituary in the paper. Only happened a week ago, October 16th. The coroner pronounced him dead at 11 a.m. after his son found him. I stood there, staring into the black, the words hitting me one by one. That wasn't possible. It wasn't even October 16th yet. It was almost a month away. My father had a heart attack 4 months ago, and he was still alive. Frail, sure, but alive. What? I managed, but my voice came out trembling. I wanted to sound angry, wanted to challenge the lie, but all I could feel was confusion. Somehow, hearing it in that tone, in that darkness, part of me believed he meant it. Well, the man said, his tone unchanged, smooth and unbothered. You look like you've got somewhere to be. I'm sure you don't want to be stuck talking to an old man like me all night. He didn't move, didn't nod or wave. Just sat there, head still, the ember of one cigarette fading as he lit another with slow, deliberate care. How good night now, he added. It was then I realized how long I'd been standing there, in that darkness I'd always hated. My skin crawled, a cold sweat dripping down my back, determined to brush it off as something mundane, something strange. Maybe he was drunk or high and just trying to make small talk. I forced a polite, "You too," and started walking again. I didn't look back. The rest of the walk went on without incident. No more voices, no movement, nothing but the sound of my own footsteps and the rustling wind in the trees. Before long, I was back under the steady wash of streetlights, their soft buzz oddly comforting after what I'd just heard. The darkness behind me felt heavier somehow, like it was still watching as I walked away. I've always had a bit of a temper, and the more I replayed that conversation on my way to Doug's house, the more it pissed me off. Who says something like that to a man's kid? Who tells someone their father's dead like it's casual small talk? It wasn't polite. It wasn't normal. So why the hell was I polite back? Why didn't I tell him to fuck off and mind his own damn business? I kept turning it over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. But every time I pictured standing there in that dark stretch of road, the glow of the cigarette, that voice, something cold crawled up from my gut. That same dread I'd felt before crept back in, quiet but inevitable. By the time I got to Doug's place, he could tell right away that something was off. I must have looked pale or rattled, at the very least. We walked into his tiny apartment, a cramped little space tucked behind the old comic shop his parents owned. The place always smelled faintly of paper, dust, and burnt coffee. Doug dropped onto the couch, eyeing me with that mix of concern, immediately sensing my unease. "Dude," he said, brow furrowing, "what happened? You okay?" I told Doug before about that streetlight and how stupid it made me feel to be scared of it, even as an adult. He laughed it off at the time, said he sometimes went for late-night runs himself, and that even he found that stretch a little unnerving. So, when I told him what had happened, the man on the porch, the things he'd said, Doug just stared at me, wide-eyed and speechless for a moment. "That's a hell of a fucked up thing to joke about," he finally said. "Yeah," I replied, though I didn't sound convinced. I'm not sure it was a joke. Maybe he was high, or drunk, or just burned out enough to believe what he was saying. Doug nodded slowly, but kept glancing at me like he was trying to read something behind my words. And for the rest of the night, even as we talked about other things, I couldn't shake the image of that porch and the faint orange glow of a cigarette floating in the dark. As our night ended, marked by the pale glow of sunrise creeping over the rooftops, I said goodbye to Doug and started walking back home. It wouldn't have been hard to take another route, maybe cut through a side street or two, but that would have added time, and I was exhausted. I just wanted to get home the quickest way possible. Besides, it was dawn by then. The streetlights had gone out, and the road was bathed in that soft gray light that makes everything look harmless. I told myself the man had probably gone to bed hours ago. I figured I'd pass by without incident. No voices, no cigarettes glowing in the dark. Just a quiet walk home in the morning air. There was a steady surge and lull of early morning traffic, commuters heading to their 7 to 4s and 8 to 5s. And for the first time in a while, I felt completely at ease. The sun was up, the world was awake, and all that nighttime dread felt foolish in hindsight. Then, just before the halfway point, I realized where I was. I was standing in front of the house with a broken streetlight. I never really looked at it in daylight before. Without the shroud of darkness, it seemed ordinary enough, just another aging house on a quiet street. Still, something about it drew my attention. I stopped walking and stood there for a moment, taking it in. It looked plain enough in the morning light, ordinary, almost. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized how wrong that first impression was. The house looked abandoned, though not completely derelict. It was a tall, two-story place with faded blue paint that had been chipping for what must have been decades. 4 windows faced the street, 2 on the top floor, 2 on the bottom. The lower left one had a corner cracked out, patched clumsily with duct tape and a piece of cardboard that had long since gone soft from weather. If anyone lived there, you wouldn't know it. There were no curtains, no decorations, nothing in the yard, just 2 old lawn chairs sitting side by side on the porch angled toward the street. I found myself staring at those windows for a long time, trying to see inside. The light was poor, the glass smeared with dust and time, but even squinting, I couldn't make out any furniture. No shapes, no movement. Whoever lived there, if anyone did, either kept things impossibly Spartan or didn't live there at all. Even in the daylight, that uneasy feeling began to creep back in. It wasn't as strong as it was at night, but it was there, distant but distinct, like a faint echo under my skin. I told myself I was being ridiculous and decided to keep moving. Dad didn't sleep much these days. His last heart attack had left him with a strange rhythm, 3 or 4 hours of sleep, 3 or 4 awake, like his body couldn't decide which it preferred. This was usually one of the times he was up, so I figured I'd stop and talk with him for a bit before heading upstairs to bed. Small talk, nothing serious. Just a few words between us before I crashed for the day. It felt comforting somehow, the thought of walking into that warm, familiar house after the strangeness of the night and seeing him sitting in his usual spot. I stepped inside and just stood there for a moment, letting the quiet comfort of home settle over me. The speakers of my father's computer drifted from his room, that familiar sound that always meant he was up and moving. "Dad, I'm home," I called out as I hung my jacket by the door. "Good morning, son," came his reply, steady and warm, unmistakably alive. I walked to his doorway, and we talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. The kind of small talk that fills the space between people who know each other too well to need many words. I found myself smiling, just happy to see him there, breathing, talking real, standing in that doorway. It hit me how absurd the night before had been. Whatever that man on the porch had said, whatever I'd thought I'd heard, it was nonsense. My father was here, alive, fine. I gave him a hug, told him I'd see him later, and headed upstairs to bed. Within minutes, the comfort of the house swallowed me whole, and I drifted into sleep. I didn't have to work that night. I kept my graveyard schedule even on days off. It made things easier than constantly flipping between day and night. Besides, it had its perks. When the weekend rolled around, I could stay out later than everyone else, long after most people were nodding off around 1 in the morning. When I finally woke up, the sun was already gone, and my phone buzzed with a text from Doug. "Are you up for hanging out again tonight?" I stared at it for a moment, debating. I had nothing else to do, so I typed back a quick, "Yes, sure," and hit send. As soon as I set the phone down, the thought crept in, the walk there, that stretch of road, the house, and the broken streetlight. A shiver ran through me before I could stop it. I tried to laugh it off, but the image of that man sitting in the dark, cigarette glowing faintly on the porch, wouldn't leave my head. I brushed my thoughts off as absurd. My father was alive, and that was proof enough that the man's words had been nothing more than some drunken or drug-fueled nonsense. Whatever strange, prophetic tone he'd used, it didn't matter. He was probably just another lost soul in a run-down town, talking to himself, talking to anyone who'd listen. Even if he was there again, I told myself I'd just keep walking. No hesitation, no stopping to chat. Just pass by, mind my own business, and leave that gnawing void behind me. I didn't change anything about my usual routine. Before heading out, I checked in on my dad. He was asleep, the deep kind of sleep that comes after one of his tiring brief stints awake where he pushed himself a little too far to stay up. I made him a quick dinner, something simple he could heat up when he woke, and left a note on the fridge like I always did. Normally, I just scribbled down what it was and what shelf it was on. But this time, without really thinking about it, I added 3 extra words at the bottom. "I love you." I stared at it for a second after I'd written it, unsure why I'd felt the need. The man's words from the night before had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit, like some part of me, buried deep down, didn't want to take any chances. With that, I started my usual trek down to Doug's house. The night air was cool, the streets were mostly empty, just the faint murmur of distant traffic and the soft scuff of my shoes against the pavement. And then, like always, I saw it well before I reached it. That stretch of darkness. Even from far away, the black abyss where the streetlight used to glow was unmistakable. It loomed there, a void in the middle of the quiet avenue, like it was waiting for me. It almost felt alive, as if it were taunting me for coming back, or worse, beckoning me toward it. Step by terrible step, I approached, hoping the man on the porch wasn't there again. It was 10 p.m., and not a soul, save me, was out on the streets. I reached the edge of the dead streetlight and paused, weighing whether I should backtrack a block and take a detour. I stared into the darkness of the porch and, after a moment, couldn't make out anyone sitting in either chair this time. I built up my courage and stepped into the dark. The quiet night air was broken by the approach of a car, its headlights washing the void with merciful light. As it approached, it began to drift toward my side of the street. I thought for sure it was going to hit that broken streetlight, but shortly before it reached me, the car corrected itself and slowed down to a stop right next to me. I was on edge given the circumstances, but it was just my aunt. She'd seen me walking and wanted to ask how my dad was. The relief I felt in that instant, I can't describe. I hid a sigh and told her he was doing as well as he could, given everything. She asked if I needed a ride, and stupidly I said no, since she was headed in the opposite direction. The greatest regret of my life to this day is not accepting that ride. We said our goodbyes, and no sooner had I started to traverse the dark again than that same tired voice drifted out. Nice night, isn't it? To say the blood in my veins froze would be an understatement. I'm pretty sure it hit absolute zero. My head snapped to the porch, and there he was again, the same faint glow of a cigarette hanging in the dark. I told myself I'd just keep walking. That's what I promised myself. Just keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look. So why didn't I? No matter how much I willed myself forward, I couldn't move. It was like something invisible had wrapped around my legs, holding me there. My mouth went dry, my mind blank. What was I so afraid of? He hadn't threatened me before. Sure, he'd said some strange, unnerving things, but he hadn't tried to hurt me. Maybe he was just some old man, lonely and confused, maybe high out of his mind. That's what I told myself, anyway. Finally, forcing the words out through a dry throat, I managed to stammer. I never got your name, friend. You said knew my father. I don't think he ever mentioned you. He took not one, but two long drags of his cigarette before answering, each one stretching the silence into something unbearable. The ember flared, dimmed, flared again. Luke, he finally said. That was it. No explanation, no story, no follow-up about how he'd known my father or when. Just Luke. I don't know what I was expecting. Something familiar, maybe? Something that would make the whole thing make sense, but Luke wasn't it. Despite the fear tightening in my chest, I almost laughed. The absurdity of it, the plainness of the name after all that tension was ridiculous. That brief flicker of humor didn't last, because the moment he said it, something in the air seemed to shift. The space between us felt heavier somehow. And though I couldn't explain why, I got the sense that by speaking his name aloud, he'd won something, like we'd been playing a game I didn't know I was part of, and he just made the final move. Luke, I said, a chill running through me just for speaking his name aloud. How exactly did you know my father? Out of all the things I could have said in that moment, I wish to God I hadn't asked that. His voice changed, low and wet at first, then twisting into a snarl that made every hair on my body stand up. Slowly, he rose from the chair. He was huge, hulking wrong, far taller than any man had a right to be. His outline seemed to stretch beyond what the dim light of the cigarette could possibly show. The cigarette burned between his fingers as he lifted it to his mouth one last time, inhaling so hard the ember flared blood red. Then, through teeth clenched around smoke, he roared, "Ask your mother." The sound tore through the air, half scream, half animal noise, and then he moved. He came off that porch like lightning, appendages twisting and bending at sickly angles as they pounded down the steps toward me. And for a second, I couldn't even breathe. My whole body locked in place, my mind refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. Then something snapped in my head, and instinct took over. I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape too. As I broke free from the darkness beneath that dead streetlight, I made the mistake of looking back. He was standing there, right at the edge of the void, perfectly still. The cigarette still glowed in his mouth, but now the glow reached his eyes. I remember crying. By the time I reached Doug's place, I was a wreck, shaking, out of breath, barely able to speak. He didn't ask questions right away. Just let me inside and lock the door behind us. Once I could breathe again, I told him everything. Every detail, even the parts that made me sound insane. The man on the porch, his name, the way he changed, the voice, the eyes. I let it all come out because it was impossible to keep inside. Doug just listened. His face was pale. His expression caught somewhere between concern and disbelief. When I finished, he quietly poured me a drink and handed it over without a word. There wasn't much he could say. What comfort could you offer someone describing something like that? I was trembling, half drunk on adrenaline and fear, more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. All I could manage was, "Can I crash here tonight?" "Yeah, man," he said, without hesitation. He disappeared into his room while I lay down on that tiny couch in his even tinier apartment. Somehow, it felt like it was the safest place in the world. Sleep came eventually, but it wasn't peaceful. I dreamed of Luke, his wet, snarling voice, and those burning red eyes. Doug gave me a ride home the next morning. I didn't even want to walk past that house, not even in the daylight. When I got home, Dad was up. He looked at me with concern as soon as I came through the door. I told him I just had too much to drink with Doug, and he accepted it, though I could tell he didn't believe that was the whole story. I went upstairs, still trembling, and laid down again. Somehow, I was still exhausted, like the fear that night had drained something vital out of me. When I woke up, it was late afternoon. The light outside was soft and gold, but for the first time, it didn't feel comforting. It felt like the day was running out too soon. All I could think about was Luke's, or whatever the hell that was, last words. "Ask your mother." What did that mean? He'd never mentioned her before. Up until that moment, brief as those two encounters had been, everything he'd said had been about my father. My parents divorced years ago. I love my mom, of course, but we weren't especially close. We'd talk on holidays, birthdays, and the once-a-month call to let her know I was alive. But now, after everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to call her. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, debating it, before finally picking up the phone. The line rang a few times, and for a second, I almost hung up. Then her familiar voice came through, light and cheerful as ever. "Hi, honey. You haven't called in a while. It's good to hear from you." For a moment, I couldn't respond. I just sat there, listening to her voice, trying to find the words. When I finally spoke, I decided to just be direct. "Hey, Mom, I know this is kind of a weird question out of the blue, but do you know a friend of Dad's named Luke?" The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, and it didn't end. It stretched on, so long that I had to pull the phone away from my ear just to check if the call had dropped. But it didn't. She was still there, quiet. "Who told you about Luke, sweetie?" Her voice had changed, sharp now, suspicious. Before I could answer, she spoke again, louder, almost scolding. "I specifically told your father and grandmother to never tell you boys about Luke." Mom, wait," I said quickly, trying to calm her down. "Dad didn't tell me about Luke. Luke did." The silence that followed was worse than before. "He lives a little over half a mile down the street from me," I added, my voice shaking a little. When she finally spoke again, her tone had shifted completely, no longer angry, but in disbelief. "Honey, that's absolutely impossible." I didn't say anything. "Luke was your father's best friend," she went on quietly, her voice trembling. "Back in the 70s. That's how we met, actually. I was Luke's fiancé." I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "All three of us partied together for years," she said. "Your father, me, and Luke. We were stupid back then, drinking, drugs, all of it. But I wanted to stop, to settle down, and Luke didn't. Mark, your dad, was in the same place I was. He was getting tired of that life. We fell in love, and Luke couldn't handle it." Her voice cracked, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "Your father and I talked to Luke, and we ended up having a huge blowout. I could hear her sniffling on the other side of the line. "He started drinking more and more," she said softly. "Then one night, drunk, he got behind the wheel, crashed his car into a streetlight. I didn't breathe. It was right in front of his home on the same street you live on." She finished. "But honey, that was almost 30 years ago." What she said next sent a cold shiver straight through me. "They never fully fixed that streetlight," she said quietly, almost to herself. "God, since the city fixed it after he died, it's been flickering on and off every time I drive by it." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, faint and uneven, remembering something she didn't want to. "I always tend to think of Luke when I see it," she added softly. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, as I was staring out my window at the faint orange glow of the horizon beyond the trees. That was when I made the decision that I never wanted to walk down that road again. 3 years have passed since that phone call with my mother. Dad was still alive, but getting worse. The times he spent awake and asleep had grown shorter over the years, until his days were little more than fragments, his brief stretches of motion between equally brief stretches of rest. When he was up, he could still move around, do a few chores, even cook a small meal. But the effort always drained him. More often, he'd retreat to his room to lie down again, worn down by his own body. It was in the fall when I awoke one day to the sound of his alarm. I had heard it the night before drifting upstairs where my room was, but given his even more odd schedule than mine, I didn't find it odd and had fallen asleep. When I woke up, I could hear it going off again. For a while, I told myself maybe he'd already gotten up. Maybe he was in the kitchen or outside for air. There were rare days when he felt strong enough to take the car out, drive down to the corner store for coffee or groceries. But when I listened closer, the house was silent except for the persistent chime of his alarm. I walked to his room and pushed the door open. The bed was empty. The window beside it looked out over the driveway, and there his car sat, untouched. Confused, I stepped further inside. The room still smelled faintly of smoke. Dad had never quit, no matter how many times the doctors begged him to. A small ashtray sat beside his computer, a freshly lit cigarette still glowing. It was odd, I thought, because it looked like he hadn't been there for hours. That's when my foot struck something. I looked down and saw him. He had fallen beside his chair, one hand still clutching his chest. His face was peaceful, almost resigned. But I knew the moment I saw him, that he was gone. My hand was shaking as I pulled out my phone to call 911. Tears blurred my vision for a moment before I wiped them away to see the screen. And that's when I noticed the date. October 16th. Luke never said what year. Story 5. A bad trip. When I was 15, my friends and I kind of naturally split into two groups. It wasn't intentional or dramatic. It just sort of happened. On one side, there were the kids who stayed focused, did their homework, and basically stuck to what parents and teachers expected. They spent weekends studying, playing sports, or hanging out at someone's house, staying away from trouble. Then there was my group. We were different. Not bad exactly, just less interested in rules. We liked parties, staying out late, and having new experiences. We tried stuff we probably shouldn't have, like sneaking cigarettes, drinking beers behind the school, and messing around with whatever seemed exciting at the time. At 15, it just felt good to be free and careless, and we didn't think much about consequences. By that point, I'd already experimented a bit with drugs, mostly just weed. It wasn't like we were heavy users or anything. We were just kids messing around, trying things out, seeing how far we could push things before they got serious. But there was something else on my mind, something that seemed even bigger than anything else. I really wanted to have my first time. A few of my friends had already done it, and every time they talked about it, I felt this annoying sense of missing out. Looking back, I couldn't help but laugh at how important it seemed. But honestly, at 15, that's exactly how you think. You do almost anything to avoid feeling left behind or inexperienced, even if you weren't ready. It was stupid, but not completely unusual. Back then, I used to hang out mostly with my friend Maxwell. For reasons none of us fully understood at the time, Maxwell lived completely alone. Some family issues had pushed him out on his own, and by the age of 16, he already had his own small apartment. It became our unofficial hangout spot, a place free of rules and parents, which was exactly what we were looking for. Usually it was just me, Maxwell, Bobby, and David, though we all called David Fatty since he was a bigger guy. Nobody really meant anything by it. The nickname just stuck. We'd sit around for hours playing video games, smoking weed, and joking about nothing in particular. At one point, we even decided we should form a band. We had guitars and drums and big plans to get famous, but somehow we never really got around to actually practicing, let alone playing any gigs. Sometimes, during these lazy afternoons, I'd quietly scribble poems in a notebook. Nobody ever read them, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. They were probably terrible, just teenage angst and random thoughts. One afternoon, I was hanging out at Maxwell's again, just killing time and figuring out what to do later that night. We were on our phones, calling around and texting people, trying to sort out plans, when suddenly the doorbell rang. Maxwell looked confused. I asked, "Did you invite someone over?" "Nah," he replied, glancing back at me. "Did you?" I shook my head. Maxwell got up, walked over to the door, and peered through the peephole. Almost instantly, his expression changed into a wide, knowing grin. Without another word, he swung the door open, revealing his cousin, Tommy, standing there with a casual smile. "What's up, Tommy?" Maxwell asked, clearly happy to see him. "What brings you here?" Tommy stepped inside, shrugging slightly as he said, "I was just in the area. Business, you know the drill." Tommy was Maxwell's older cousin, probably somewhere in his early 20s. He worked at some IT company, doing the kind of tech stuff we knew nothing about. To us, his job was a mystery, but that wasn't really what mattered. What made Tommy special was that he always seemed to know everyone, and even better, he usually brought weed. "Oh, by the way," Maxwell said, motioning toward me, "this is Clay." I gave Tommy a quick nod and smile, and he returned it easily. Then, without ceremony, Tommy tossed his jacket onto the couch and plopped down right beside me. Maxwell's eyes brightened as he asked, "You bring any weed?" Tommy laughed and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small plastic bag and placing it on the table. Maxwell's face lit up, and he immediately grabbed the bong from the corner. "Should we hit the bong?" Maxwell asked eagerly, but Tommy shook his head, suddenly serious. "No, man. I heard about Mike's lung collapsing after he hit one. That stuff freaked me out. Let's keep it simple." Maxwell agreed, putting the bong aside and reaching instead for some rolling papers. We smoked and relaxed, sinking comfortably into our usual routine. As we sat there, I thought back to the first time I'd smoked weed. It was right after school, hidden behind some wall, coughing so hard I thought I was going to throw up. Now, though, smoking had become just another ordinary part of life, something normal, familiar, and comfortable. After we finished the joint, Tommy casually reached into his pocket and pulled out a small mirror. Without saying a word, he placed it on the table and carefully poured some white powder onto it. My curiosity instantly kicked in. "Is that cocaine?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. Tommy shook his head slightly. "Nah, it's speed," he replied. Then he glanced up at us. "You guys want a line?" Maxwell immediately waved it off. "I'll stick with weed," he said. He never liked experimenting beyond that, always content to keep things simple. But me? I felt different. I was eager for new experiences, ready to try anything at least once. I nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'll have some." Tommy smiled slightly, pulling a credit card from his wallet. He carefully cut a small line for me and pushed the mirror toward my side of the table. He handed me a rolled-up bill. I leaned down and inhaled sharply. The powder stung a bit as it hit my nostrils, but the feeling quickly passed, replaced by an intense, alert sensation. Tommy chuckled, leaning back on the couch. "You ever snorted before?" I shook my head, still feeling a rush building inside me. "First time." He nodded knowingly. "It's good stuff. Keeps you awake, focused." I took all my exams on it. Just then, Maxwell glanced down at his phone. Fatty just texted. Said we should meet him at our usual spot. Tommy stretched, getting ready to stand up. "I gotta head out anyway," he said, grabbing his jacket. Before leaving, he turned to me, shaking my hand firmly. I felt something small and metallic press into my palm, and I immediately slipped it into my pocket without looking. Deep down, I had a pretty good idea of what it was, but I didn't say anything. Tommy gave us a casual wave, walked out the door, and vanished into the hallway. Maxwell and I got ready, locked up the apartment, and headed out to meet Fatty and the rest of the guys. As we walked down the street, I started to feel the speed kicking in for real. It was like a jolt of electricity running through my body. My mind raced, every sound and light felt sharper, clearer, and I couldn't stop myself from smiling. I felt unstoppable, confident, energized in a way that I never had before. It was a rush like nothing else. As we approached our usual hangout spot, we saw Fatty standing outside, surrounded by a bunch of people. The place was ironically called Stay Clean, but it couldn't have been further from the truth. It was a run-down, shady bar, but the owner didn't care how old we were as long as we spent a little money, which is exactly why we hung out there. Fatty had brought along some people Maxwell I had never seen before, including a few girls, good-looking ones, as I quietly pointed out to Maxwell. That was Fatty's special talent. Somehow, despite being bigger than the rest of us, he always managed to attract girls. Back then, we couldn't understand how he did it. But looking back now, it makes perfect sense. Fatty had something the rest of us didn't: confidence, charm, and an effortless way with words. After a few beers and some casual conversations, I got up to head to the bathroom. Once I was done peeing, curiosity got the better of me. I took out the metallic object Tommy had slipped into my hand earlier. Opening it carefully, I saw it was filled with speed. Without hesitating, I used my phone screen to form a line, snorted it, and instantly felt the powerful rush, stronger than the first line Tommy had given me. It sent a jolt of excitement through my body, making me smile as I stepped out of the bathroom. Suddenly, I had a strong craving for cigarettes. Looking around, I saw Fatty standing outside with two girls, laughing and talking. One girl was blonde, and the other had brunette hair almost exactly like mine. I decided to head outside too, lighting a cigarette and positioning myself next to the brunette. "Hey," I said casually, taking a drag and smiling at her. "Haven't seen you around before." She smiled back easily. "Yeah, I know David from school. I'm Julia, by the way." "Clay," I replied, exhaling smoke into the cool night air. We stood there smoking and chatting about nothing in particular, but soon I felt restless. Maybe it was the speed talking, but I felt bored, eager for some action. "I'm kind of bored," I admitted impulsively. "Want to do something else?" Julia looked thoughtful for a moment before suddenly brightening up. "Let's go watch a movie at the theater," she suggested, smiling mischievously. I raised an eyebrow, confused. "Theater? You know that place has been abandoned for years, right?" Everyone in town knew the old movie theater hadn't shown a movie in at least 2 years. It was falling apart, and people used to joke that you'd catch AIDS just from sitting on the seats too long. Julia laughed, rolling her eyes. "Exactly. That's why we should break in." At first, I hesitated. Sure, I was a little rebellious, but breaking and entering wasn't exactly my thing. Getting into trouble wasn't on my to-do list. But then again, I was 15, a dumb, reckless 15-year-old, convinced this might finally be my chance to have my first time. Plus, with the speed coursing through my veins, logic wasn't exactly running the show. So, without much more thought, I let her grab my hand and lead me away from the bar toward the old theater, feeling both nervous and excited as we disappeared into the night. We walked along the main street, passing cars, streetlights, and groups of people out for the night. Eventually, we reached the place. Even from a distance, it looked completely run down, with faded movie posters still hanging outside, windows cracked, and a booth with broken glass. It was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to be haunted or something. Julia walked up and tried the main door, which was obviously locked. Then she turned to me, eyes sparkling mischievously. "Kick it in," she said, nodding at the door. "It's glass anyway. We can slip right through." I hesitated at first, but looking at her expectant face, I knew I'd probably do anything to impress her. Taking a deep breath, I thought, screw it, and kicked the glass. To both of our surprise, it shattered easily, the sound echoing loudly through the empty street. She laughed softly, squeezing through the broken door. I followed quickly, trying to ignore the voice in my head screaming that this was probably a terrible idea. Inside, the place was even more eerie. We wandered into one of the halls, rows of dusty old seats stretching toward a huge screen at the far end. As we made our way down the aisle, my eyes unintentionally drifted toward her backside. She must have sensed it because she glanced over her shoulder with a knowing smile, causing my face to immediately turn bright red. We sat down in the front row, and I lit up another cigarette, trying to act casual. "So," I asked, exhaling smoke, "what now?" She raised her eyebrows playfully. "How about a show?" For a moment, I just froze, my mind instantly spinning through every possible scenario that could mean. I stayed quiet for too long, clearly because she suddenly laughed and shook her head. "A movie, dummy," she teased, smirking at me. "Oh," I replied awkwardly, feeling incredibly stupid. "Right." She glanced around thoughtfully. "There's got to be a projector room somewhere. Think you can make it work?" By this point, hesitation wasn't even a factor. I stubbed out my cigarette and stood up quickly. "I'll give it a shot." I wandered around the dark halls aimlessly at first, but eventually found a door behind the main hall that looked promising. Praying silently, I reached for the handle. It turned easily, and the door creaked open. Relieved, I stepped into the dusty projector room, my heart racing with excitement and anticipation of what would come next. Inside the projector room, I looked around quickly but didn't see any film reels lying out. Just as I was about to give up, my eyes caught sight of a dusty cardboard box shoved under a desk. On the side, someone had scrawled in black marker, "Pleasure." I smirked to myself, curious now, and dragged it out. Opening it, I found a few old film rolls inside. They had no titles, just numbers scribbled randomly on each one. Screw it, I thought. It didn't really matter what movie played. I figured Julia and I would probably be too busy making out to even watch it. After fumbling around with the old, rusty projector for what felt like forever, I finally managed to load a random film and got the thing to sputter to life. The projector whirred quietly, casting flickering light onto the big screen. Before leaving the room, I stopped, pulling out the vial Tommy had given me. I poured the rest of it out, cutting a quick, shaky line on the back of my phone and inhaling sharply. A rush instantly hit me, sharp, energizing, making my heart pound in my chest. Feeling confident, I quickly checked my wallet, making sure the condom I'd been carrying around for ages was still there. Confirming it, I put my wallet back and headed back toward Julia, ready for whatever was next. But as soon as I stepped into the hall, I noticed something was off. The seat next to where I'd been sitting earlier was empty. Julia wasn't there. I didn't panic immediately. Maybe she'd just gone to the bathroom, I thought, sitting back down. To pass the time, I lit up another cigarette, glancing absently at the screen. The movie was weird, grainy footage, shaky like something made by high school kids instead of a real movie studio. It showed some old dirt path, surrounded by trees and shadows. Nothing really happening. I shrugged it off, too distracted, wondering where Julia had gone. After finishing my cigarette, I started feeling restless. Julia had been gone too long. Putting the cigarette out, I stood up and walked toward the door, suddenly anxious. While I pushed the handle, the door didn't budge. I pushed again, harder. Still nothing. A sinking feeling crept into my stomach, and panic began to stir deep inside me. "Julia?" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. Silence replied. I stood there, heart racing faster, as a slow realization started to dawn on me. The door was locked. I took a shaky breath, trying to convince myself everything was fine. Julia was probably just stuck outside or playing some kind of prank. I sat back down in my seat, rubbing my sweaty palms on my jeans and trying to settle my nerves. But then my eyes wandered to the screen again, and my heart froze. It was Julia, but not in front of me. She was on the screen, walking along that strange, wooded path from earlier. She turned around, smiling slightly, waving as if she wanted me to follow. I squinted at the screen, confused. Something felt incredibly off. It didn't feel like watching a movie at all. It was far too vivid, almost as if I was looking through a window rather than at a projection. It felt so real I thought I could touch it. Before I knew it, I was on my feet, drawn closer, my hands stretching toward the screen. When my fingers touched the surface, instead of feeling fabric or solid material, my hand went straight through. A sharp jolt of panic shot through my body as I pulled back, staring at my hand, trembling. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head, but curiosity, or maybe something darker, got the better of me. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, passing completely through the screen. Suddenly, I wasn't in the cinema anymore. I was standing in an open field surrounded by torches, their flames flickering softly in the night. Beneath my feet, the ground felt strangely uneven, loose like someone had dug here before. I glanced down, and a chill shot through my spine. Mixed in with the dirt was something else, strands of hair, dark and familiar. Brunette hair, like Julia's. A sudden, crushing force seemed to knock me to my knees, as though the earth itself pulled me down. Panic surged through me as I frantically began to dig, my fingers clawing desperately at the dirt. My hands cramped and ached, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. Finally, my fingers brushed against something solid. I cleared the dirt away desperately, expecting Julia's face to stare back at me. But it wasn't Julia. It was mine. I stumbled backward, gasping, heart racing out of control. Fear gripped me so hard I could barely breathe, and without thinking, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I sprinted through the field, down that cursed path I'd seen before, driven only by raw panic and fear. Suddenly, everything blurred and shifted. I blinked, disoriented, and found myself back in the cinema, sitting in the same seat as before. Warm blood trickled slowly from my nose onto my shirt. My chest heaved as I tried to regain my breath, heart still thumping furiously. I stood shakily, legs trembling as I moved to the door. This time, it opened without resistance. Without looking back, I ran through the abandoned cinema, out into the street, and kept running until I reached Maxwell's apartment, slamming the door shut behind me, desperate for the nightmare to be over. I passed out the second I hit Maxwell's couch. The adrenaline had worn off, the come-down hit me like a brick, and everything from the night before spun around in my head until it all just shut off. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was already creeping through the blinds. My mouth felt dry as sand, my head foggy. Maxwell was already up, scrolling through his phone, a bowl of cereal in his lap. He glanced at me. "You good?" he asked, chewing lazily. "Looked like you had way too much to drink last night." I blinked at him for a second and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "You're probably right." I wasn't about to tell him what really happened. I barely understood it myself. It felt too weird, too unreal, like some dream that slipped through a crack and got stuck in my brain. Part of me didn't even trust my own memory. Had I just freaked out on a bad trip? Or did something actually happen? "I should get going," I said, grabbing my jacket. "Before my dad flips." Maxwell just shrugged, and I left without another word. The walk home was slow. Everything felt distant, like I was watching my life from the outside. I kept going over the night in my head. Julia, the cinema, the screen, the feel of my own face in the dirt. It didn't add up. None of it did. And then there was Tommy. I kept thinking about that vial he gave me. He said it was speed, but what if it wasn't? I didn't know much about drugs, not really. I thought I did, but now I realized I had no clue. For all I knew, he could have handed me anything. By the time I got home, I barely said a word to anyone. I went straight to my room and just lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Even after dinner, when I tried to act normal, my head kept drifting back to that night. What I saw, how it felt, how real it all was. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and called David. If anyone knew Julia, it'd be him, right? "Yo," he answered casually. "Hey," I said. "Quick question, Julia. That girl you brought last night. Brunette. Cute. You got her number?" There was a pause on the line. "Julia," he repeated. "Yeah, from last night. She said she knew you from school." "Clay, I don't know any Julia," he said, sounding genuinely confused. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear. My mouth went dry. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he said. "You sure you're okay, man? You sound off." I didn't answer. I just ended the call and stared at the wall, everything suddenly feeling a whole lot colder. The next morning, I was shaken out of sleep by my dad knocking on my door. "Get up, Clay," he called. "You've got school." I grunted something close to okay and dragged myself out of bed. My body felt heavy, like I'd barely slept, but there was no time to think about it. I got dressed, grabbed my backpack, and took my bike out into the cold morning air. As I rode through town, I passed the same streets, the same stores, the same half-dead energy that every weekday seemed to carry. But then I saw it, the old theater, just sitting there like nothing had happened, like it hadn't nearly torn a hole in my reality 2 nights ago. Something pulled at me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe something worse, but I slowed down, staring at the building. I glanced at my phone. The first period was 15 minutes away. Screw it. I locked up my bike nearby and walked toward the entrance. My heart started pounding as I got closer, but then I stopped cold. The glass door, the one I had shattered with my own foot, was perfectly intact. Not a crack, not even a scratch. It looked exactly like it always had, old, dirty, but unbroken. I pushed on the door. Locked. I looked around to make sure no one was watching, then backed up and gave it a hard kick. Nothing. The glass didn't budge. No satisfying crack. No crash like last time. Just a dull thud and pain shooting up my leg. Frustrated, I found a big rock by the sidewalk and hurled it at the glass. Crash. Finally, the window went in. Shards clattered to the ground. I ducked through, heart pounding like I was walking into a crime scene. And in a way, I was. Inside, it looked exactly like it had that night. Old, moldy, dust clinging to everything. The air smelled the same, damp and forgotten. But something felt off. Emptier. It took me longer to find the projector room this time. Like the place didn't want to be explored. When I finally got there, I opened the door and headed inside. The projector was still there, sitting like some relic of the past. But there was no film loaded. Worse than that, the box. The dusty box marked pleasure with the random film reels. It was gone. I searched for the room top to bottom, but it wasn't there. Nothing was. It was like someone had come in and cleaned just that one thing out. That gave me chills. So now I had two options. Either I'd had the worst trip imaginable, an overdose-level hallucination where I imagined an entire night, a girl, a movie, even my own death, or someone had been here, and they'd taken the films. But the one thing I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried, was Julia. Where had she gone? Who was she? Why had David said he didn't know her? She wasn't just a part of the trip. I remembered her. Her voice. Her smile. I made my way into the main hall again, the air still thick with that musty, forgotten smell. It looked exactly like before. Those rows of ragged seats, the torn curtains flanking the massive screen that hadn't shown a real movie in years. I walked slowly down the aisle, heart dragging with every step, until I reached the same spot where Julia and I'd sat. I lowered myself into the seat, elbows on my knees, hands covering my face. I had to face it. It wasn't the speed Tommy gave me. Whatever it was, it messed up my head in ways I couldn't explain. Hallucinations, time lapses, things that couldn't be real. For the first time since this whole thing started, I admitted something I didn't want to admit. Maybe all of this, the experimenting, the chasing of highs, the craving to be part of something cool, was just bullshit. It wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't harmless. And I wasn't in control. I sat up, drawing a slow breath. I felt clearer, even if the pit in my stomach hadn't gone away. It was time to stop. Time to grow up, or at least try. I stood, ready to leave this place behind and maybe get to the second period like nothing had happened. But that's when I saw it. Right there on the ground in front of the seat, just lying there like it had been waiting for me, was a bundle of brunette strands. Long, tangled, and unmistakably real. My breath caught in my throat. I crouched down, reached for them with shaking fingers, and picked them up. It was hair. Julia's hair. I turned slowly in place, the silence around me suddenly louder than before. The walls seemed to lean in, the screen looming above like a giant eye. Every creak of the building now felt like footsteps. Every shadow like something watching. I stood in that old cinema, holding those strands in my hand, and for the first time since that night, I truly felt like I wasn't alone. Something had been here. Maybe it still was. Story 6. There's something wrong with the empty apartment next to mine. I had only moved in a week ago. The apartment was in a good spot, not in the busiest part of the city, but still easy to reach. I managed to rent a place on the top floor of a 5-story building. Up here, the hallway was already quite narrow, and there weren't many apartments. In fact, on this top floor, there were only 4. Mine in the far right corner, at the end of the hall. Next to it, an apartment that supposedly had been empty for years, then another one that had been under renovation for a long time, and at the opposite end lived an elderly woman alone. When the landlord showed me around, I immediately fell in love with the place. There weren't many tall buildings in the neighborhood, so it felt like you were above the city itself, able to see far into the distance and enjoy the sight of distant trees and the sunset. That apartment felt like a dream. Without much hesitation, I decided to take it. Within a few days, I had moved in, and I thought to myself, I couldn't have been luckier. Maybe about a week had passed when I first heard the noises. One night, in the middle of my sleep, I was jolted awake. It sounded as if something had toppled over, a wardrobe or some heavy piece of furniture. I sat up in bed immediately, startled. Where could such a loud crash have come from? I quickly switched on a small lamp on my nightstand, just in case it was a burglar or who knows what. Then it came again, a loud bang. But this time it sounded like a door slamming shut, followed by heavy footsteps. The sounds were coming from the apartment next door, the one right beside mine. I sat there in confusion. The landlord had told me that the place had been empty for years. An elderly couple had lived there once. They had a child, but he moved abroad, and the apartment was left to decay. And now it sounded as if someone was unpacking or even moving in. At 1 a.m, I glanced at the clock. Sure enough, it was exactly 1 a.m. Again came the noise like boxes tumbling over. Just my luck, I thought. I finally moved into my dream apartment, and now some lunatic decides to move in next door in the middle of the night. I got up, went to the living room, and checked if the front door and windows were locked. I was still a little paranoid, being new to the place. But everything was secure. I poured myself a glass of water and went back to the bedroom. After all, I had work in the morning. I didn't want to spend the whole night listening to someone rearranging furniture. Thankfully, I was tired enough that sleep eventually pulled me under, though the noises went on. When my alarm woke me in the morning, there was silence. Not a sound, just like when I had first moved in a week earlier. In the morning, I just rushed out of the apartment. I still gave the neighbor's door an angry look, but I didn't have time for anything. Work was waiting at the office. My day went by quickly, just an average Tuesday. On the way home, I grabbed some Chinese food for dinner. Perfect. At home, I watched TV. I didn't have anything better to do than watch stupid shows. Quiz shows were my favorite. But since they weren't very exciting, I fell asleep on the couch right after dinner with the TV still on. I nearly screamed when I woke up. The couch had actually trembled beneath me. It felt like a ton of dirt had just crashed down somewhere, or like a train was thundering by on the street outside. It lasted only a second, but in my half-asleep state, it terrified me. What was happening? I pushed myself up from the couch and went to splash water on my face to wake up a little. Then I heard it again. The same noises as last night. Shifting, shuffling like someone was remodeling the apartment. I sat back down on the couch, irritated. I should have known. It was too good to be true. A lovely little apartment, almost no neighbors, in such a great location. I should have known there was a catch. I slumped on the couch, gloomy. The TV was still on, though my favorite show had ended long ago. Now it was already 1 a.m. That's when it hit me. Again, exactly 1 a.m., just like last night. Was this some sick joke next door to start moving furniture at 1 a.m? Then a racket erupted from the neighbor's apartment, like someone had started up a 100-year-old washing machine. My couch vibrated, the wall hummed, and something seemed to clatter on the other side. Indignant, I turned up the volume on my TV. If it's war, fine, war it is. Tomorrow I'd be working from home anyway. I could deal with their noise tonight. The documentary about overweight people was now blaring so loud it gave me a headache. But I didn't back down. If they weren't going to mind themselves, then I'd show them. Then suddenly someone knocked on my door. No, pounded on it angrily. I got mad, too. They're the ones making noise, and they're pounding on my door. This was the second night I'd been woken up by their midnight remodeling. I stomped to the door and yanked it open. Standing there was a sleepy-looking man in a bathrobe and pajamas. Not at all who I was expecting. "Man, are you insane?" he began. "It's 1:30 in the morning and you're blasting your TV? Are you out of your mind?" I stammered, flustered. I was just fighting with the neighbors. The man squinted at me in confusion, as if I'd said something impossible. "Which neighbors?" he sneered. No one's lived next to you for years. And the people below you moved out last month. Both places are empty. A heavy silence fell. I didn't know what to say. The man looked both irritated, tired, and deeply contemptuous. Turn the damn TV down, he snapped finally. I can hear it 2 floors down. I'm trying to sleep. Yeah, sorry. It won't happen again, I mumbled nervously. But then it hit me. What if this guy could only hear my TV, but not that horrendous banging and clattering coming from next door? As he turned to leave, I called after him. Wait, I said. You're sure you didn't hear anything else besides my TV? No, he shot back, his expression hard. Now turn it down, or next time I'm calling the cops. He went down the stairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I quickly switched off the TV. Better not give him another reason to complain. But the question gnawed at me. What was going on next door, and how come no one else seemed to notice? My day was awful. No matter how much I thought work would distract me, I couldn't focus on anything except what the hell was going on in the apartment next door. What was all this about? I kept listening during the day, straining my ears, waiting to hear something, but nothing. Even during meetings, my mind wandered, wondering if I'd catch a sound. My boss even snapped at me, asking if I was paying attention, because it was obvious my head was somewhere else entirely. By the end of the day, I felt like I'd had enough. I'd be better off at home. Maybe I just needed a walk in the afternoon. Otherwise, I really would go crazy obsessing over the noises next door. As soon as I stepped out of my apartment, I saw the one neighbor on my floor, the elderly woman, reaching the top of the stairs. Good afternoon. I greeted her politely. She only nodded, breathing heavily. She was carrying a big shopping bag. She must have been exhausted. But as soon as she realized which apartment I'd come out of, it was like she got spooked. She hurried toward her own place with the heavy bag. I didn't think twice. I hurried after her and offered my help. No need, son, she said, eyes downcast, as if she didn't even want to look at me. I can manage it myself. All right, I said kindly, but then at least help me with one thing. If I can, I'll try, the woman replied with a small laugh. What is it you need? Something was strange. She never stopped walking, as if she were trying to escape me. She kept her eyes on the floor, barely sparing me a glance. Do you happen to know? I pressed, even as she was practically running away from me. What's going on in the apartment next to mine? The woman didn't want to answer, just kept heading for her door, mumbling to herself. She didn't say a word until we were right at her apartment. Up until then, she only puffed and sighed, like she was searching for the right words. So you do know what the noises are at night? I insisted. I most certainly do not, she snapped as she unlocked her door. Without another word, she tried to slip inside, pretending I wasn't even there. But I can see you know something, I said, anger creeping into my voice. What's with the banging at 1 a.m? The old woman turned back from her doorway then. This time she looked me straight in the eye. On her face, I could see it, fear. Fear of something she maybe couldn't even speak about. Son, she said, after a brief pause, don't ask questions. Don't look into it. Stay put. You'll be better off. And with that, as if closing the matter forever, she pulled her door shut right in my face. I just stood there completely baffled. What did she mean? Don't look into it. You'll be better off? What was in that apartment? As I pressed my face to the wall, the murmuring voice suddenly grew clearer. I could hear the man speaking, but it didn't make any sense. He was reciting numbers, one after another. After a moment of thinking, I pieced it together. These were dates. Dates for next week. What the hell did that mean? What was going to happen then? And then the banging started again. It sounded like someone had shoved a ridiculously heavy suitcase right against my wall. I jumped back in fright. Did they realize I'd been listening? But I quickly dismissed the thought because now I heard voices from outside. Talking. People were speaking in the hallway. This was my chance. No matter what anyone said, I had to find out what was going on in that apartment next door, the one that had kept me awake for 3 nights straight. I rushed to my door and flung it open without thinking. There was a figure standing at the neighbor's door. He looked like a homeless man, though I couldn't see his face. A baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, and on top of that he had a hood drawn tight. His thick coat was soaked, and he was dressed as if it weren't the middle of August. Hey, I called out immediately. Mind telling me what the hell you're doing in the neighbor's place? I barely got the words out before the figure shoved an envelope through the neighbor's mail slot and bolted down the stairs. That was it, my blood boiled. This bastard had probably broken into the empty apartment, pretending no one lived there, and now he was the one keeping me up at night. I wasn't about to let it slide. Still barefoot, in just a tank top and underwear, I tore after him. The man, realizing I was chasing him, started running faster, practically leaping down the steps. "Stop, you bastard!" I shouted after him. "What the hell are you doing in there?" But the figure didn't answer. He only ran harder. "Stop, damn it!" I screamed, furious. But barefoot and rushing, I missed a step. I hissed in pain as I crashed down on my knee. The man didn't even glance back. He vanished around the last bend of the stairwell. He was probably out on the street already. I was never going to find out who he was. Cursing under my breath, I sat on the edge of the stairs, rubbing my throbbing ankle. I'd wrenched it badly in my stupid rush. Just then, a young woman appeared, coming up the stairs. She froze when she saw me sitting there. She said nervously. "Good evening." It clicked right away. She lived on the second floor, if I remember correctly, and she must have been coming home from party. She looked a little tipsy. "Hey," I muttered. "Go on, don't worry. I live up on the fifth. Just had a little accident, that's all." The girl gave me a strange smile, clearly unsure what to make of finding me sitting there in the middle of the night. Then she slipped past without another word, hurrying upstairs. "Wait a sec," I called after her. "You didn't happen to see anyone leave through the front door, did you?" She turned back, hesitating, thinking. "No, I don't think so," she said finally. "I was sitting in my boyfriend's car out front for at least 20 minutes, and no one came out at that time. Sorry." Then she turned and kept going up the stairs. I stayed where I was, rubbing my aching ankle, and only one thought burned in my mind. That damn apartment next door. That night, I figured it was best not to mess around with the neighbor again. I was tired, and I had work the next day. But when I woke up in the morning, I decided I wasn't going to work after all. My ankle had swollen up badly, and it was hard to even stand on it. So I had an awkward call with my boss, telling him I'd be working from home for a while. The day dragged on. I wrapped up my foot, took some meds, hoping it would help. By the time the day finally crawled by, I was exhausted. I ordered some takeout and decided I'd just ignore the neighbor's place for now. If I kept obsessing, I was going to lose my mind. But after 3 nights of being jolted awake at 1 a.m., I passed out almost immediately. I woke to shouting. Someone was yelling, loud, angry. I couldn't understand the words. It wasn't even my language. But by the tone alone, it sounded like someone was having a heated argument. I went to the bathroom to pull myself together. But just moments later, I heard more shouting. This time it was different. Louder, harsher. It sounded like a fight. Shouts, crashing noises, furniture clattering, heavy thuds. I couldn't take it anymore. This was ending tonight. I limped out into the hallway. The corridor was silent, as if nothing at all was happening inside the neighbor's apartment. I pounded on their door, loud enough to rattle it on its hinges. Nothing. Not a word. Not a sound. It was as if the apartment really were empty, and no one had been brawling inside just seconds earlier. I knocked again, harder this time, the door shaking under my fist. I knew someone was in there. I've been hearing them every night for days. Still, no answer. "Could you keep it down already?" I yelled at the door. But again, silence. The entire floor was dead quiet. I licked my lips nervously, seething. Unbelievable, the kind of crap some people pull. Furious, I turned back toward my apartment, glaring daggers at the neighbor's door. But just as I reached my own, I heard it. A click. The neighbor's door had unlocked. I froze, my eyes locked on the entrance across from me, waiting to see who or what would come out. But no one stepped through. The door swung open wide, and yet not a single sound came from inside. I stood there, rooted in place, staring at the dark opening. Who had opened that door, if no one was in there? "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called into the open doorway, my voice a little shaky. As angry as I'd been just moments ago, the door swinging open on its own had rattled me. But curiosity was stronger. What were my neighbors doing here? Neighbors who supposedly didn't even live in this place. "I'm coming in." I ventured further inside. "I just want to talk to you about keeping it down at night." I crept slowly into the apartment. The entryway was completely empty, looking as though no one had lived there for years. The few pieces of furniture were draped in plastic, though, really, there wasn't much furniture at all. But I quickly saw where the noise must have been coming from. One of the interior doors was ajar, a red glow spilling out from within, and I thought I saw movement. Sorry, hello? Is anyone here? I called again, hoping someone would step out. No one came. Not a word. Not a sound. Not even a stir. I hesitated. What the hell was I doing in someone else's apartment? If they found me here, they'd think I was a burglar and bash my head in. But something still pulled me forward. I pushed the door open wider, and what I saw inside froze me in place. It was a room set up for developing photographs. The red lamps glowed faintly. Strange equipment cluttered every surface, the kind used for making prints. But what shocked me most, every single photo was of me, taken as if someone had been inside my apartment, constantly photographing me, eating breakfast, sleeping, even showering, or pounding on the wall in frustration, yelling at the noisy neighbors. What the hell was this? How had someone gotten into my apartment to take these pictures? Was it under surveillance? But these weren't security cam shots. It looked like someone had been standing right next to me, snapping pictures. But there's no one else in my apartment. Just me. I stepped closer, inspecting the photos. All of them were me. Sometimes scruffier, sometimes with different hair, but unmistakably me. Then I turned them over and saw the backs. Dates. The dates made it even creepier. Some showed times that hadn't even happened yet. Others were from when I hadn't even moved in. Different furniture, different clothes. Yet some were exactly the same, like Tuesday night, eating Chinese takeout, zoning out in front of my favorite show. What the hell is going on? Someone is spying on me. Then came the real shock. One photo slipped in among the others. The date on it was exactly 2 weeks from now. And there I was again. Only this time, I was lying in the middle of the room, right where my couch stands now, sprawled on a rug, gutted and bleeding out. My blood ran cold. Even if these photos were doctored, how? And why? Panic took over. I had to get out of this apartment now. I bolted from the room, out into the hallway. The building was still silent, eerily so, like no one at all lived here. I slammed the neighbor's door shut and rushed back into my own apartment. I paced back and forth, gasping. What should I do? What does a person even do in a situation like this? There was only one sane decision left. Get out. Move out of here as soon as possible. Then, standing there in my living room, my knees trembling, I saw something. Out of the corner of my eye, just over my shoulder, a flash. A camera flash. Story 7. Can anybody tell me what day it is? My dog summoned a demon. Now the sky is black, and I have no way of telling the time. I'm sure we've all had a day where nothing seems to go right. I slept in late this morning. I stepped in a puddle of water from the leaky sink in my bathroom with my socks on. The stereo in my car is broken and keeps making that buzzing noise. I was late to work. I was ripped a new one by my manager. I received a notice that if I delay paying the rent another week, I'll be kicked out. And my shithead dog decided to chew open a random package I don't remember signing for and unleashing hell in my apartment. Okay, that last part may not be as common, but I swear I've seen other Reddit threads about this type of situation. So don't come for me. I'm kind of trying to get this out as quickly as possible because I'm not sure how much longer the internet is going to last. I'm keeping my eye on the corner of my screen because the battery is depleting by the minute and the Wi-Fi keeps getting worse. The time has completely disappeared on my phone, my laptop, my grandmother's clock, the microwave. Anywhere the time would normally be, it's gone. My calendar app is gone too. Not like I ever used it anyway, but my real calendar is totally blank. Even the numbers and hands on my Walmart wristwatch that's been collecting dust on my nightstand are gone as well. I stepped out onto the tiny balcony on the side of my apartment building to look up and see if I could tell time the old-fashioned way, but neither the sun or the moon was there. The sky is completely pitch black, so I have no idea what time of day it could be. I try to keep track in my mind, but I can barely remember what I ate on my way to work. I know I got back sometime around 10 p.m., and that's when I saw Rudy, my dog. He is the cutest border collie, but ever since I picked him up from the shelter a few years ago, he has done nothing but make mess after mess. I suppose because I'm gone so much, he doesn't really get the chance to be very active and gets bored. Probably why, when a mysterious package that turned out to be Pandora's box showed up. He ripped it open and had a heyday. He was jumping up and pawing at me, barking excitedly as normal as I entered my apartment. But immediately upon stepping inside, I noticed several dirty red palm marks covering my floors, walls, and furniture. They looked like some weird, occult symbols smeared and scratched all over the place. "Rudy, no!" I yelled, looking around. What did you do? For what reason?" Suddenly, I tripped over something on the floor and fell on my face. Bloody nose. Sniffling, I looked to see what I had tripped on and saw a black wooden board. I went to pick it up, and taped beneath it, I found a small, folded slip of paper with a symbol on the front, similar to the ones covering my walls and floor. To summon this deity, smear its ancient symbols, and speak its demonic tongue. I flipped the paper over, and on the back, I saw a bunch of letters haphazardly scribbled in dark ink. I couldn't make out a single cohesive word. It looked as if someone tried to put the growls and the corn's song twist into words. I wondered if someone had sent me this as a prank, and, judging from the 3 other blackboards I saw around the room, my little doggy really did a number on the box it came in. I assume it had some red ink balloon or something that was supposed to burst when opened, but that wouldn't explain why Rudy's palm marks and smears look almost exactly like the symbol on paper. Did someone break into my apartment? Why go through all this trouble just for a prank? I hardly know anybody around here, let alone someone who is this dedicated to something so stupid. I picked myself back up, holding my nose and tilting my head back while Rudy watched me, sitting obediently and looking pleasantly confused. I pointed at him. "We will discuss this in a second. You stay there," I said firmly as I turned to go to the bathroom. That's when I noticed my calendar hanging by the small fridge in my kitchen. The little square divisions were still there, but the numbers for the days were missing. I went over and began flipping through it. This raised further suspicion in me that someone had broken in, because all of the pages were blank. It's possible the person who left the package for me also replaced my calendar and messed with the clocks and appliances around my apartment as part of the gag. At least, that was the most reasonable conclusion I had, until I went to check the time on my phone, and it too was gone. I heard my dog barking, so I shoved some toilet paper up my nose and went to check on him. I quite literally turned my back for a moment, and when I returned, I heard him growling and barking in a way I've never heard before. "Rudy," I saw my dog sitting, wagging his tail. He started jumping up and pawing at something in the dark corner by the door. I couldn't make out its shape right away, but it was massive. I could hear what sounded like thick, sharp objects scraping against the ceiling and little cracking of joints as if it were hunching itself over. I saw a single arm reach out to Rudy, and not wanting to draw attention to myself, I stifled a scream. It was thick, and the flesh appeared rough. Rigid wooden spikes stuck out of its knuckles, and its nails were long, boxy, and brown. Although it was blending in with the dark, there were visible smears of that dirty red color all over the arm. I could hear it breathing, low and guttural. I stood there, frozen, when suddenly I could feel its terrifying gaze now focusing on me. Panicked, I called Rudy, and luckily he came to me. We ran, and I didn't hear that thing following, which was somehow worse as I couldn't tell if it was silently coming after us. We ducked into the bedroom, and I pulled my phone out of my pocket before stopping. I realized I didn't have anyone I could call. My parents live in another state, and all of my friends I met online. 911 wouldn't be helpful either. What would I say? "Hello. Yes, this is an emergency." You see, while I was at work, someone broke into my apartment and left a wooden box which my dog ripped apart, smearing ancient symbols all over the place with mysterious red ink and growling the words of some demonic language. So now there's an evil deity, demon thing blocking the only exit. Also, I can't tell the time. No, I don't have a history of poor mental health. We were sitting there for a while. It felt like hours. My back was killing me, and I was exhausted. I didn't hear that thing outside my bedroom door, so I stood up to get some air. I had no idea how long Rudy and I had been curled up between my bed and the wall. This is when I crept through the sliding doors of my balcony and stepped out to see if I could read the sky. Unfortunately, the moon was gone, and the sun wasn't anywhere in sight either. Note that because of the already smaller size of my apartment building, my balcony has no stairs attached to it, so Rudy and I were wholly trapped. I went back inside and tried looking up information online about mysterious black wooden boxes, dirty red ink, time going missing, stuff like that. I even put in a full description of the arm I saw reaching for Rudy in the search bar, but it was all to no avail. The only results I got were a bunch of shock sites, satirical articles, and corny short-form horror content. Of course, Reddit was my last resort. I have Discord too, but it was all buggy due to the Wi-Fi, and I don't have anything like Twitter or Facebook. I don't have any better ideas right now, and time is of the essence. Rudy crawled out from under my arm, and I watched as he began jumping up and pawing at the bedroom door. He was wagging his tail and barking loudly. I get the feeling there's going to be a full blackout soon. So, can anybody tell me what day it is?